Revolutionary greetings, comrades. We are here to discuss the Zimbabwe political and economic crisis. In most of the cases, we seem to address the symptoms, not the root cause of our political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe. And the whole nation has been mobilized that the crisis is as a result of ZANU-PF. Therefore, to resolve the political and the economic crisis is to remove ZANU-PF from power. Once you remove ZANU-PF from power, you will have resolved the political and the economic crisis. While this might be yes, but it is not the root cause of the crisis. The danger that we have is that we are likely to remove ZANU-PF from power and replace it with another ZANU-PF in a different name. So this is why we need to deal with the root cause of our crisis in Zimbabwe. I know that some of you are traveling. It's a holiday. But if you are not traveling, you are around, please write in the comment section. You can ask your questions as we discuss the root cause of the political and the economic crisis in Zimbabwe so that we share some ideas. Zimbabwe was colonized by the South African or by the British South African Company. We have discussed how the liberation movement was established. What we need to point out is that the colonization was the expansion of the imperialist agenda, not only in Zimbabwe, but across all colonies, be it in Africa, in Asia, in South America. It was the expansion of the imperialist agenda. We'll recall that in early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, the liberation movement in Zimbabwe began to have strong links with the Soviet Union and the other, what was referred to as the socialist bloc countries. And at the time, it was during the Cold War. The world was split into two. Those aligned to the Soviet Union and those aligned to America, Britain, and their friends, what we normally call as the West. But after the counter-revolutionaries in the Soviet Union collapsed the Soviet Union in 1991, America emerged as the sole superpower globally. Now, in 1963, it is the imperialist forces that split the liberation movement up because they did not want the expansion, what they call the expansion of communist ideas in this part of the world. It is Margaret Thatcher and her friends that handed over power to ZANU-PF in 1980. What surprises some of us is that there are many, the majority of the people were ululating, celebrating the victory of ZANU-PF in 1980. The same people today, when we tell them that when we talk of ZANU-PF, we are talking of a symptom of a problem. When you differ with a triple C, for instance, you are simply donated to ZANU-PF. But some of these people that begin to donate some of us to ZANU-PF have been sustaining ZANU-PF because first and foremost, the ZANU-PF did not impose itself on the people of Zimbabwe in 1980. Neither did they impose themselves in 1985. People freely voted for them, realizing later that it was a mistake. While some of us never voted for ZANU-PF in 1985 because we understood that ZANU-PF was a project of the imperialist forces, it does not mean good for the majority of the people of Zimbabwe. It does not advance the interests of the Zimbabwean people, but it advances the interest of their creators, the imperialist forces. So our economic and the political crisis in Zimbabwe is as a result of the imperialist forces who have mobilized their stooges inside Zimbabwe so that they continue to loot our resources. So in order for us to resolve our political and the economic crisis in Zimbabwe, we must defeat the imperialist forces. And how do we defeat the imperialist forces? We need, first and foremost, build the vanguard of the working class and peasants. We must build the Zimbabwe Communist Party. That's the first step. But the Zimbabwe Communist Party, or any communist party for that matter, is not a class in itself, because this is a class struggle. So a communist party cannot be a class in itself. It is an organ of the working class and peasantry. So we must continue to educate the working class and the peasantry. We must mobilize them so that we do not fall into the danger of replacing ZANU-PF with another ZANU-PF in a different name. In other words, replacing ZANU-PF does not mean we have defeated ZANUism in Zimbabwe. So the problem in Zimbabwe is the imperialist forces. And someone then asked me, says, Comrade McBurn, is it the imperialist forces that committed a genocide in Matabeleland and part of Midlands? And we argue that had the imperialist forces not handed over power to their puppet in 1980, we're not going to have a genocide. We're not going to have a Gukura wound in Zimbabwe. The fact that the imperialist forces handed power to their stooges in the form of ZANU-PF. This is why we ended up, firstly, with the failure to build an inclusive nation. We have discussed the national question. That there are some Zimbabweans that feel that they are not Zimbabwean enough. Hence, we hear the calls of a Mtwagazi state. People say, no, let's separate, let us go to history, let us establish a borderline along what was known as the Jameson line, restore that borderline. When you talk to these comrades, they will tell you that they feel a sense of exclusion and marginalization. And they believe that once you restore what is called the Mtwagazi state, their problems will evaporate. Just like those that say, once you remove ZANU-PF from power, our problems are going to evaporate. Yes, ZANU-PF must go. It must go on the basis that it is a project of imperialist forces. We will not defeat imperialism as long as ZANU-PF is still in power. We agree on that. What we saw under the leadership of former President Robert Mugabe, post-2000, is that the local parasitic bourgeoisie were competing with imperialist forces in looting our resources in Zimbabwe. The Mugabe administration never meant good for the people of Zimbabwe, just as the Emerson Mnangagwa administration does not mean good for the people of Zimbabwe. The Triple C might appear to mean good for the people of Zimbabwe, but it does not mean good for the people of Zimbabwe. It is not different from ZANU-PF in 1980. The majority supported ZANU-PF in 1980 because they believed it meant good. If you are not born or if you're too young, you can go and ask your parents why they voted for ZANU in 1980. They will tell you that ZANU meant good in 1980. And then they will argue that later on, it betrayed the ideals of the revolution or the ideals of the liberation struggle. No, it never meant good from the word go in 1963 because it was created as a project of imperialist forces. Triple C might appear just like ZANU-PF in 1979, 1980, which are so popular in rural communities, might appear as meaning good to the people of Zimbabwe. It does not mean good. Once it gets into power, 15 years down the line, people say, no, 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 we made a mistake. So we should not deal with the symptom. We must deal with the root cause of our problems. So in order for us to resolve the political and the economic crisis in Zimbabwe, we must defeat imperialism. But we can't, as the people of Zimbabwe alone, defeat imperialism. It's not possible. This is why we need to build a strong communist movement in Africa if we are to defeat imperialist forces. Yes, we must do our part in Zimbabwe in rejecting imperialism. Comrades in South Africa must do their part, in Kenya, in Eswatini, and everywhere must do their part. And then we combine our work and they push out the imperialist forces and they transit to the next stage of human development, which is socialism. We have spoken in this platform on how we need to transit to socialism. And we have said you cannot just transit to socialism. It is not like pressing a TV remote. We have said that we need to build a national democratic economy before we transit to a socialist economy. So as I conclude, our crisis is as a result of imperialism in Zimbabwe. Foreign direct investment will not assist or will not end our economic crisis. We had so much investment in 1991 in Zimbabwe. We adopted the neoliberal policies. In 1995, we had so much investment. But our economy was collapsing. Simply because we had abandoned the national planning, which was started by the Rhodesians. And by the way, we need to set the record straight here. That the Rhodesians were not imperialists. I know that to some it might appear weird. Rhodesians were not imperialists. This is why the so-called international community imposed the sanctions on Rhodesians. They were not imperialists. The Rhodesians, just as white South Africans, wanted to build a home in Zimbabwe, which was called Rhodesia, and in South Africa, a permanent home, because they considered that as their home. This is why, if you follow closely, in South Africa, the debate about the migrants, foreign migrants, or yes, migrants, they will not tell you correctly. They understand that in South Africa, you have white South Africans, you have blacks, you have Indians. They will not be saying drive out white South Africans because they understand that these are South Africans and they don't view them as migrants. If you listen to what Put South Africa First, to what Operation Tudula says, they accept that these are South Africans. They've departed from the philosophy of the Pan-Africanistic Congress and AZAP, which said, drive out white person, white people out of South Africa, drive them to the sea. No, they've departed from that philosophy. They recognize that there are white South Africans, just as we have white Zimbabweans, whom we generally refer as ex-Rhodesians. They are Zimbabweans. They were never imperialists. So the struggle, therefore, was about, in the main, while the struggle was against imperialism and colonialism, but in the later years, was about building a society where every citizen will feel a sense of belonging. In other words, ending racial oppression. We've discussed about racial oppression, which you understand clearly. So the struggle was about ending racial oppression, what we call the majority rule. The thinking in adopting that slogan, majority rule and universal suffrage, was that once the majority of black people are in power, you will be able to deal with the class question. In other words, you are able to transform our society or to place the economy in the hands of majority. So we ignored or we postponed the class question for a majority rule. If the majority of Zimbabweans today understand, and some of them are beginning to say, no, 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 it was better under Ian Douglas Smith. Why? Because we postponed the class question. When we emerged victorious in 1980, and when majority rule was ushered in 1980, we did not address the class question. But what we did through what we call indigenization, which is black empowerment, we created a black middle class in the main, which was politically connected. It is this black middle class, the few, who are now controlling the means of production. In the case of Zimbabwe today, the black middle class has basically collapsed. What we now have is the looting class that has emerged from the black. Firstly, we built a strong black middle class, right? But with the introduction of the Economic Structural Adjustment Program, the black middle class began to collapse. This is why today you have professionals, teachers, and other professionals, journalists, lawyers who work in South Africa or in Europe as domestic workers, right? Because the black middle class in Zimbabwe collapsed. And what emerged out of those ashes was what we today refer as the looting class that continues to smuggle our minerals and the other resources that raid the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Those that are in the diaspora are traveling to Zimbabwe over the holidays. When you get to border, you'll find young people carrying monies called the Mospateleni, it is not their money. This looting class raids the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. They give this money to Ospatelene. Xa fika kobulawayo, Ospatelene, baphethe imali. And it is not theirs. It belongs to this looting class. So as I conclude, we need to unite against imperialism. We need to unite against the mighty Americans and their friends. They have no interest. They do not have our interest. They have their economic interests. We've spoken about American democrats that we must reject. Please write in the comment section and please enjoy your holidays. Do not drive while you're also on the steering wheel. You're busy WhatsApping. Let's stay safe on the roads. Otherwise, like this video, subscribe, spread to your friends, and have a good holiday. Goodbye.